The Penguin. I'm going to tell you guys all about this amazing series. I'm going to share my favorite takeaways in terms of like dialogue and scenes and background to the creation of the show itself, and also break down certain writing devices used within the series as a takeaway to my fellow writers out there. Spoiler alert, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't watched the series, which I highly recommend that you do, and you're not into spoilers, definitely skip past this segment. But if you've watched the series or if you don't mind spoilers, please stick around. So The Penguin is an HBO original series that was released in 2024. And as we like to do here in the Spun Today Podcast, I would like to first and foremost shout out the writers. The character of the Penguin was created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane. This show specifically was created, developed, and written by Lauren LaFranc, with additional writing credits going to, and apologies in advance for butchering anyone's name, Vladimir Cvetko, Brianna Gibson, Erica L. Johnson, John McCutcheon, Shay Agbona, Nick Town, and Noel Valdivia. Shout out to each and every one of the writers that put this series together. And here's the official synopsis. Following the events of The Batman, which is the film that was released in 2022, Oz Cobb, aka the Penguin, makes a play to seize the reins of the crime world in Gotham. Now, very interestingly, which I feel sets the tone for the show, the Penguin, which we all know as one of the iconic villain characters within the Batman universe, this takes place within that same world of the Batman, specifically the Batman film where Robert Pattinson played Batman. It's that specific Penguin character, that same character. And the series actually picks up, I believe, like 2 weeks after where the film ended. But very interestingly, there's only 2 mentions of Batman throughout this entire series. In the very, very beginning, we hear a mention of him during a news reporting that's speaking to a terrorist attack orchestrated by the Riddler, where bridges and tunnels and dams were exploded and very large flooding ensued. And there's one mention of Batman there helping to rescue folks that are in need. Then at the very, very, very end, before the series or the season fades to black, there is a bat signal shown in the sky. Besides that, everything in between, zero to do with Batman. Which, by the way, I am personally a fan of, but it was really cool to see them take this direction and not rely on that iconic character of Batman to kind of like lift the show. And it made it like something else completely, entirely. And you've probably heard it referred to and compared to, for example, shows like The Sopranos. And it's definitely more leaning in the direction of that type of show than a superhero show or film. Because it has to do with this, organized crime underbelly of Gotham City. And it's really cool to explore that world from that vantage point. So first, I want to touch on a couple of themes that we see throughout the show. Privilege versus hunger is a through line theme in the show. We have the contrast of the Falcons, which are the number 1/2, depending on the episode throughout the series, organized crime family in Gotham. The ones that are quote unquote born full. And then you have characters like Oz, who fought their way and scrapped their way up to and for everything that they have. So on one side, you have the privileged side. You have the mob families, which are at the top of, again, this organized crime world. The Falcons, the Maronis. But you also have, within that group of the privileged, the crooked cops that are on the take, the corrupted politicians, and folks like that. Then on the flip side, characters like Oz, aka the Penguin, Vic, which we'll learn more about later, Squid, and all the smaller gangs and cliques, which are the underlings of those powerful mob families, but the ones that are like nickeling and diming. And also on the hunger side of that equation, you have the poor civilians, which are, just trying to live their lives in these crime-ridden neighborhoods, the folks that are addicted to the drugs being sold, so on and so forth. And this dynamic shapes and motivates the actions of each of the characters that we get to know. With a privilege, for example, take a blind eye to the people that they addict with their drugs, and turn a blind eye to the people that die due to the related violence associated with them and their criminal enterprises. Because to them, it's just a bottom line profit motive thing, right? And that profit and accumulation of it is what allows them to hold on to their privileged lifestyles. Then on the flip side, you have the have-nots, if you will, which are driven by the hunger to become part of that privileged group. And they're willing to do anything and everything to get to that level, including lying and cheating and stealing and murder. Key takeaway from my fellow writers out there related to this theme is that as writers, we can craft compelling disparities like this between groups of folks with varying levels of privilege to heighten the conflict and deepen the characters that we create. A dope line that I want to share from the series is relating to this theme is when Oz Cobb, speaking with Vic, tells him that in relation to the Falcones, kind of like bad-mouthing them behind their back, says that they don't even know what they got because they always had it. Never hungry, born full. Another theme we see play out throughout this series is family and legacy. And we see a lot of different family dynamics throughout the series and start to learn how each of those dynamics influence the characters and their respective character arcs. For some, family is an anchor, a sense of strength. And for others, it becomes a weakness. And you'll see as the series goes on how that dynamic even switches within characters themselves. For example, the character of Oz, aka Oz Cobb, aka Oswald Cobb, aka the Penguin, which is our main character of the series. He has a really strained but loving, caring relationship with his mother. His mother, Frances Cobb, played by Deirdre O'Connell. And it's in the sense that he looks after her. She's older, and we see that she's ill. She's on a lot of medications. She has some sort of dementia going on. And she is the only person that he's like really soft with. And we also realize very early on that he's motivated by a desperate need for her approval. And he uses that approval as like a strength to drive his ambition. And we see that play out in a myriad of different ways throughout the series. And later we're going to see how that relationship in and of itself is rooted in a deep betrayal. Kevin Bray, who directed episodes 106 and 107, he highlights this juxtaposition within the character of Oz of how despicable of a person Oz is, contrasted with how soft and caring he is with his mom. Now, another character in the series who definitely explores this theme of like family and legacy is Sophia Falcone, played by Kristen Milotti. Now, on the flip side, Sophia grew up idolizing her family and putting them up on a pedestal. And she was desperately seeking her father's approval. And she really wanted to be seen as an equal. Her father, Carmine Falcone, played by Mark Strong, was the head of the Falcone family. And he has two kids that we know of. Alberto Falcone, played by Michael Zegan, who is the heir apparent to take over the family in his father's absence, but we later find that he's a bit of a loser. And Sophia. But Sophia is the one that's sharp. She's the one that could lead the family forward into the future, but she's a female, and that's not how things work in the mob. So she's both seeking her father's approval while at the same time trying to overcome this, customary hurdle of the male son is the one that takes over the family business. But this whole family dynamic that she has completely gets flipped on its head when she's betrayed by her father and the family after uncovering something unfavorable about her pops. And he uses his influence and crooked controls to get her arrested and sentenced to Arkham Insane Asylum, and ultimately frames her for the murder of like 9 or 11 women that he himself seems to have killed. And now her yearning like for the family and to be loved by the family and seen as like a strong enough figure to take over the family business, that yearning for family becomes a weakness for her. And ultimately, what she wants is nothing to do with her family and just to burn the entire legacy to the ground. And that's what her character, from this perspective of family and legacy theme, wrestles with throughout the series. And we also see throughout the series how both Oz, Sophia, and other characters that we're going to meet are layered characters throughout the series, meaning they're not two-dimensional characters. You know, like I'm possessed by the devil and just want to do evil for evil's sake type characters. Each of them exhibit traits of humanity and also ruthlessness. They show love and also complete callous disregard for life. And these type of gray characters, morally gray characters, are the ones that resonate most with audiences. So that's definitely a takeaway for my fellow writers out there. So a little bit more about Oz, our main character. Let's speak about his characterization through action, or the representation of his character. So most characters are going to have an internal want or need versus an external want or need. Oz's internal desire is validation, mainly from his mother, but also from the higher ups within the organization, his peers. He wants to be loved and respected. His external drive is to become the kingpin and just take over everything, which in and of itself is in contrast to that internal desire of validation and being loved and stuff like that, because he has to be, you know, a ruthless, don't give a fuck who's in my way type of person to become the kingpin. And that definitely helps to layer the character. And that need for validation that he has definitely makes him more relatable as a character. Now, a key takeaway for my fellow writers out there is that we can learn how to create more complex characters by introducing this type of internal versus external conflict and use those to help drive our characters' decisions within the stories that we create. So Oz is part of the Falcons, right? He's a worker. He's not family and he's not a made man. He starts off actually as Sophia's driver, but he has this underlying ambition, this external drive to take over it all. And early on, we get a glimpse of how duplicitous and unhinged he can be, for as calculated as we learned that he is, when very early on he winds up killing Albert Falcone in like a fit of rage, which is again the heir apparent who is about to take over the family after his father's assassination. And episode after episode throughout the series, we see how Oz begins to rise and take over things by joining up and then double-crossing anyone and everyone that'll work with him on anything, but also by manipulating the smaller gangs that were always stuck in infighting and positioning them against the Maronis when it was convenient for him, and then the Falcones when it was convenient for him, and kind of playing like this double agent role within this criminal underbelly to sort of divide and conquer. This is a crazy scene actually where he goes to visit Salvatore Maroni, played by Clancy Brown, who's in prison and the head of the Maroni crime family. And he does his little like teaming up and manipulation there, winds up setting up for him to get shanked in prison, and then on the outside burns his wife and son alive when they have this like drug trade gone awry, and just does so with this like dead behind the eyes look and smirk on his face. But that's a little bit about how we see his internal versus external desires at play throughout the series. Now, flipping back to Sophia. So she goes to Arkham Asylum. She's there for, I want to say 10 years or so. She comes back out. And she has been obviously betrayed by her entire family. Her father's now dead. Her brother was the only one that, you know, visited her while she was in there, you know, didn't know about how the father was going to frame her. It kind of like stood by her. So she trusted the brother, but everyone else in the family turned their back on her. And all see her as this like batshit crazy serial killer, essentially, that killed, you know, allegedly 7 or 9 people. Now, when she's back, she finds out that her uncle assumed the role of head of the family. Because again, the father was assassinated and the brother was killed, Alberto. Although she doesn't know that, nobody knows that. They just think he's MIA because, again, he was a bit of a loser. He was on drugs. The only one that knows that he's dead is Oz at this point, and also Vic, which I'll circle back to in a bit. But she comes out, she has this chip on her shoulder. She's, playing nice with everyone, but at the same time, can't wait to give them all a fuck you. She's kind of sort of feeling out who she can trust, who she can't, while also feeling that position of running the family is rightfully hers. Because that's another thing. Before the whole framing thing and when the father turned his back on her, he actually told her that he was considering not letting the son take over and instead putting her in charge, even though it goes against like all the customs and stuff like that, but that he's powerful enough to make it happen and that he knows that she's the rightful heir to the throne. So one of the alliances that she made early on was with Oz, her ex-driver, who also was the person that knowingly or unknowingly at the time betrayed her by telling her father, his boss, that Sophia, learned about some of these murders and was speaking to a reporter about it, which is why the father turned his back on her, essentially. But they formed this, little trepidatious type of alliance. Trepidatious, is that a word? And Oz, true to being Oz, uses, whatever leverage he has in any given situation to get in the situation or out of the situation, so on and so forth. Now, one of the things Oz knows is that Johnny Vitti, played by the great Michael Kelly, who is the underboss of the uncle who took over the family, the uncle being Luca Falcone, played by Scott Cohen. Johnny Vitti is having an affair with the boss's wife. So in an attempt for Sophia to get what she wants, which is, breaking up and taking over the family, and Oz to get what he wants, which is, he's still on his personal divide and conquer thing, but now Sophia's back in the picture, so he has to play nice. And also she's kind of sniffing around because she knows that Alberto, who's been missing for days, the last person that he saw was Oz. So he uses this information about Johnny Vitti, which he was kind of keeping in his back pocket, to blackmail him and essentially get the family to turn on Uncle Luca and support them in a coup, essentially. Johnny, they literally walk into the hotel room in the middle of them fucking and, kick the wife out. And there's a hilarious line that Oz says, because Johnny Vitti, he just starts talking, in his like assertive underboss tone while he's like in bed naked. And Sophia and Oz walk in the room and he goes, "You guys say one word of this to Luca." And then Oz cuts him off, like very nonchalantly and laughing, and says, "What? Your ghost will haunt me?" That line was incredible. And then essentially they manipulate Johnny Vitti into getting all the soldiers behind him in favor of Sophia to cut out Uncle Luca. And after doing so, right there at the table where everybody's there to have this meeting, she fucking pops Vitti in the head. Just shoots him in the head. No need for him anymore. He's gone. And then she goes on to change the family name to her mother's maiden name. Her mother, who she also suspects that her mother supposedly hung herself. But now with all these other women that were strangled and hung themselves that she got framed for, she strongly believes that her father killed the mother. And, just to honor the mother, goes back to the mother's name, changes the family name to the mother's maiden name, which was Gigante. Now, all that happens, I believe, slightly off sequence. I don't remember if this happens right after or right before, but essentially there's this like big family get together where all the family's there. Oh, it was before actually. So before that happened with her popping Vitti at the table and taking over the family, there's this big family get together at the house. Uncle Luca's there, all the wives, cousins, kids. She winds up taking the vent from, or like the exhaust from the boiler and putting it into the central air vent of the house, and then walking out the house. And essentially the next morning going back in, and the entire family is dead from the quote unquote gas leak poisoning, which was a brilliant, ruthless move. And to Sophia's ruthlessness, so this is a bit of her, characterization by action, killing her entire family through this gas poisoning just highlights how like cold and calculated in nature she is. And is a way from a creative perspective, just, actions speak louder than words type of situation. Now, in terms of like symbolism and metaphors I wanted to touch on related to that is the gas poisoning can be seen as kind of a metaphor for her life and how she felt within that family, how she felt suffocated, how she felt like she was in a toxic, family environment and dynamic. And a key takeaway for my fellow writers is using actions as metaphors for the different relationships and themes that we're going for. The director of episodes 104 and 105 did something super interesting that I found I had never heard of before, and I found to be like a really impressive like visual storytelling technique. And as Sophia's character, the arc of her character goes from, this completely privileged, living off the family person, being bred to potentially take over, to getting flipped on its head, being backstabbed, and just evolving into the chaos that was her time at Arkham Asylum, to coming back, getting her vengeance, and essentially taking over control of the family. They visually showed that arc by switching from handheld cameras to steady cams and dollies. Now, the handheld cameras, they're a little bit more like shaky and kind of give the impression of like chaos going on. Whereas steady cams and dollies are completely still. No shaking, but kind of shows the audience an angle of calm, of control, which is what the director was aiming for, to indicate how, she's out of the chaotic time in her life, and now she's in complete control of her surrounding and situations. And I thought that was like really cool. On the flip side, with Oz, whenever they shot scenes with him, he's dealing with this, gritty, unpredictable underworld, backstabbing people, making deals. They continue to use the handheld cameras with him. And when you watch the series, if you notice that, it's a pretty cool, again, visual storytelling technique. Now, a key takeaway for my fellow writers out there that we can think of is, how can we mirror that type of technique, but with writing prose? So for example, or an example can be changing the tone and pacing of a sentence to reflect what we're going for. So if we want to depict like chaos and craziness going on, write shorter, choppier sentences, versus if we want to depict a sense of calm and control, have like longer, more flowing, calm language and prose. Now, let's switch to one of my favorite characters of the series, Victor Aguilar, played by Renzi Feliz. So in the very beginning, when Oz kills Alberto Falcone, he's completely alone in his nightclub that's closed down when he does so. Now, when he leaves, and he's working through how to hide the body, how to get rid of the evidence and shit like that, he's going towards his car, and he sees a bunch of kids trying to steal his rims. Remember the setting of Gotham. You just had these like massive floods that happened that they mentioned in the beginning, where Batman was busy, helping, trying to save people. And Gotham is this gritty, dirty, dingy, dark, poverty-stricken neighborhood. And these kids are, stealing rims, trying to make some money. Oz comes out and confronts them. They all start running away. He shoots at them, misses, but catches one kid. That kid is Victor Aguilar. He's about to kill him outright, but Victor, he's like super nervous. He's like, please don't shoot me. And Oz sees that he has a stutter and kind of has like a bit of an affinity for him, because Oz himself has a handicap. He has like this fucked up foot that makes him wear this like metal brace on his shoe to kind of sort of straighten it out as much as he can to walk, but he walks with a limp. Hence, that's how they created this character of the Penguin, this waddling character, instead of like the, overly dramatic caricature that was Danny DeVito. Although I love that movie also, Batman Returns. But, in that movie, they made the Penguin this like half man, half penguin person that was born with flippers and a human head, and they didn't go that route in this series. Again, much more realistic. He just has this waddle in the way that he walks, and this beak-like nose, this huge scar on his face, and hence the AKA penguin that some folks call him. So he decides not to kill him outright and makes him help him get Alberto Falcone's body and put it in the trunk of his car. Then he makes Victor drive his car while he's in the passenger seat and has keeps his gun on Victor, takes his wallet, looks up his name, his address, and they go to stash the body, get rid of it somewhere. And his intent is to kill Victor after he's done with that. He was just going to use him to hide the body. But Victor, flips out, pleads with him, says he can help him. He'll work for him. Please not kill him. He won't tell anybody, so on and so forth. And, kind of appeals to the humanity in Oz. And Oz decides to let him live and essentially becomes Oz's protege, which he also likes having because, again, he wants this feeling of, feeling powerful, having people look up to him, admire him, work for him. And he kind of has that in Victor, through fear versus love, but, has it nonetheless. Now, later on in the series, we meet Victor's family, which definitely seemed Dominican. It's the first time that I've ever heard Siongma on screen, which to the uninitiated, Siongma is short for Bendición Ma, or Bendición Mami, which is, in our Dominican culture, and I'm sure other Latinos as well, it's a sign of respect for your elders and close family, whether it be your parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. You say Bendición Ma or aka Siong Ma, and they'll ritualistically respond, Que Dios te bendiga, God bless you. So you're asking for their blessing, and then they say, may God bless you. And Victor, he walks in his house, it's the first thing he says, Siong Ma, and I'm like, oh shit, he's Dominican. And then I found that the creator, Lauren LaFranc, she's actually half Mexican. And when she originally wrote the character Victor, she wrote him as Mexican and gave him the last name Aguilar, which is a family name of hers. Then when they cast Renzi, which is Dominican, to the role to honor his heritage, she made the character half Mexican and half Dominican. And it was cool to hear that. It definitely adds some cultural authentic to the character. It made me resonate more with the character. And that's definitely a key takeaway for my fellow writers out there, right? Explore while you're creating your characters how you can incorporate different cultural elements or dialogues that just make your character more relatable. Now, juxtapose that to my guy Peoples from Shaft back in the day, played by Jeffrey Wright, which actually was Jeffrey Wright who actually played Commissioner Gordon in the Batman film that this series, takes place within the same world, rather. He played this character called Peoples from Shaft, which was dope to see. He portrayed a Dominican dude, a drug dealer from Washington Heights. You see mad Dominican flags everywhere. And he did a really good job. Jeffrey Wright, by the way, one of my favorite actors, probably top 10. But in this character, he had the accent down in certain spots and things that he would say, which were, culturally relevant. But then there were certain things where the accent would break, and certain things that he would say to it that it was kind of wait, what? And that type of thing definitely takes you out of it. So that's definitely a good takeaway to, make sure that you add elements and dialogue from specific cultures that you're looking to represent. So definitely good on Lauren LaFranc for that. And we also find out from the series that Victor lost his entire family, his mom, his dad, his sister, in those floods caused by the Riddler's terror attack. And from a writing technique or construct perspective, we see the Riddler terror attack and ensuing floods from the very first opening news report that we see on the TV that gets cut away from. It subtly foreshadows the tragedy of Victor's family, which is another key takeaway for my fellow writers out there. We can consciously seed elements of our story earlier on to then create this emotional type of payoff later on. So we learn about the flooding, we learn about, a lot of tragedy happened, in the very beginning, and then it's paid off emotionally when we find out that in those floods that were previously mentioned, Victor's entire family drowned and died, which definitely informs his character and the decisions that we see him make. I also want to highlight dialogue specifically as a way to give our characters distinctive voices. There's a scene where Oz takes Victor to like a fancy restaurant for lunch, and what he says has nothing to do with anything from like a plot perspective. Like, it doesn't move the story forward in that way, but it definitely adds subtext and further layers the character. And essentially they order tacos, they come back, he takes a bite, spits it out because there's cilantro on it, and he specifically asked not to have cilantro. But the way he says it is, he tells the waiter, "You might as well put a fucking bar of soap in my mouth." Or maybe it was Vic ordered the food for him and he forgot to tell him to hold the cilantro or something like that. But he says those words, and there are people, maybe some of the folks listening to this, some people who, love or hate cilantro. The folks that hate it taste cilantro differently. They taste it as literally soap, like it tastes like soap, versus folks like myself who actually enjoy cilantro. It doesn't taste like soap at all. But it kind of adds that context to his character of, he's one of those soap cilantro people, which again has nothing to do with anything, but does layer and, add a little complexity to the character, a little context to him. And a key takeaway for my fellow writers out there is to practice writing dialogue that could exhibit, this type of subtext or like character quirks. Now, in this series also, which I like and enjoy, there's a bunch of flashback scenes, and they help fill in the gaps of the characters' lives that we see. We know certain things have happened to them, but don't know the details of it. Similar to, Victor's family is like MIA. We don't know what happened to them. And then we later find out through a flashback scene that they died in the flood. So, like that type of thing. Similarly, we know that Oz's brothers died, and we have no idea why until we get to episode 7. And it's revealed that Oz, as a kid, is like this really jealous kid in terms of his mother's attention. He wants and needs more attention than his brothers. And he kind of resented his brothers whenever they got any attention from the mom. He wanted her all to himself. And they wind up going to like these underground tunnels that they used to play like hide and seek in and stuff like that. And it started raining. So, to wait out the rain, they decide to go into these tunnels and play for a while. Long story short, the two other brothers hide somewhere where Oz can't go because of the handicap that he has with his leg. Like, he has a hard time going like up and down like ladders to like catch them, and then he gets pissed off at them, and he's like, "Oh, you guys went there on purpose because I can't go there." And they were like, "Nah, we didn't. We were just trying to hide." And he winds up, out of spite, just locking them in there. And then he goes home and tells the mom that they went to the movies, the other brothers. Meanwhile, he knows where they are. And the rain intensifies, and these tunnels get filled with water when it rains. And essentially, he's at home, with the mom, completely happy to have all her attention, and being completely conscious of the more it rains, the more chance there is that these guys are going to fucking drown. But he is okay with that because then all the attention from the mom will go to him. Now, the actor that played the young Oswald Cobb, Ryder Allen, said that from his perspective, this is the moment that he rises into the villain that he is in present day, and that he feels a bit of guilt though in what he did, but that he like emotionally takes care of that by caring for his mom. That's his way of trying to like make up for what he did. Now, ultimately, after the mourning and the depression and stuff like that came from, losing 2 of your children, once they found that they did drown, the mom winds up piecing together that it was Oz that was responsible for them drowning, and that he may not have wanted them to drown or known for sure that they were going to drown, but that he did let it happen and didn't say where they were in time for them to, be able to be saved. And what's crazy is that, she saw this as like, just like, this is the devil that's living in my house. This little kid who's acting like Nothing happened. Literally killed both his brothers or caused their deaths. And she doesn't know what to do. So she turns to the local mob boss at the time that she kind of worked for in terms of like doing his books, like doing some accounting stuff for him. She confides in him on what happened and ultimately agrees that she was going to go out with him, with the son, take him out to that gangster's club, show him a good night, and then tell him to go home with the gangster guy. And then the gangster guy was going to pretty much kill young Oz. But then she winds up backing out at the last moment and not going through with it. And she holds on to this throughout the entire series, throughout his entire life growing up. She holds on to the fact that she knew what he did, but never tells him that she knew. And then he, on the opposite side, holds on to the fact of what he did and never letting her know what he did, even though obviously she knows. And as a little kid, he gave her like mad labia, like told her like mad shit of how he's gonna become somebody one day and he's gonna get her a penthouse and he's gonna do it all for her. And that becomes like the seed of this driving motivational force to like please his mom and, you know, become this kingpin to be able to live up to that promise that he makes to his mom. Something else I took away from this series is the complication of relationships, the deliberate complication of relationships. So the closest thing that Oz has to a love interest in the series is with a character called Eve Carlo, played by Carmen Ejogo. She's like the head prostitute of this like ring of women, and Oz pays her to kind of sort of have her in that girlfriend type role. It's a transactional relationship from her side, and by definition from his as well, but they do have a bit deeper of a bond, and their relationship winds up evolving into something even creepier towards the end. But there's a scene in the series where Eve meets Sophia for the first time. Sophia is doing everything she can to like track down, you know, once she's betrayed for like the umpteenth time by Oz, to track down where Oz is and where he's hiding out. And she lands eventually on Eve, his quote-unquote girlfriend. Eve is terrified of Sophia because of the whole, you know, the hangman woman persona that precedes her. You know, this serial killer that hung and killed 9 or 11 women. And, you know, via pillow talking, Oz confides in Eve, and she knows a bunch of his business. Sophia shows up to her apartment. She thinks she's for sure dead. But in their conversation, Sophia winds up clarifying that she's not the hangman, that she was framed by her father and the whole backstory, but most importantly, highlighting that Oz knew that all along. Eve felt betrayed by this because that's something that Oz kept from her to kind of sort of keep her scared of Sophia for whatever reasons. And because of that betrayal, she winds up offering up Oz, letting Sophia know where he's hiding out and where he is. And that, to me, from a writing perspective, which is a key takeaway for my fellow writers out there, is that sometimes it makes sense just to complicate things, complicate relationships, make a left when you think the relationship is going right. That helps ratchet up the tension and just keeps folks engaged, you know, makes richer, more dynamic characters and storylines. You create conflicting loyalties and betrayals, and it just raises the stakes. So Sophia then winds up using that information to track down where Oz is hiding out and where he's hiding his mom, winds up kidnapping the mother to draw Oz out to come save his mom, but winds up, in doing so, setting the scene for like a huge emotional climactic moment throughout the series, or in the series rather, where a lot is brought to light. Before we get there, though, is a hilarious line that the mom, Frances, her character says to Sophia, which is, "Did you bring me here to feed me, or are you gonna kill me?" Then Sophia gives this like monologue about her family and betrayal and stuff like that, and how she's a gigante now, not a falcone. And then Frances defiantly responds, "What are you gonna do next? Dye your hair pink and get an ass tattoo? That'll really show your dad." Which is a funny line in and of itself, but also speaks to like the psyche of Sophia, because she in many ways is rebelling against her father. But the scene that I was speaking to earlier that this ultimately sets up is where Sophia forces the hand of both the mom and of Oz to confront each other in terms of those truths that they've been holding all their lives. On one hand, that Francis knew all along that Oz was responsible for the deaths of his brothers, her other two sons, and that she really thinks that he's a piece of shit. And then on the flip side, Oz having to come to that realization that she knew all along, plus that she was planning to get him killed for doing so. And it's this huge emotional climactic moment that ultimately results in the mom stabbing Oz in the stomach while also having like this trauma-induced stroke. And a fight breaks out, and Oz ultimately picks up his mom, runs out of there, and gets away. What's really cool about that scene is that it takes place at a fictional club where the mom once upon a time took young Oz, to show him like a nice night out, which is where she was going to have the gangster guy take him home and kill him, which is now, run down and abandoned. Monroe's, it's called. But that was filmed here in Queens, in Richmond Hill, an area that I'm familiar with. It's like a town or two over for me. Right there on Lefferts and Jamaica Ave. For anybody who's familiar with the area, it's like where that old theater / bingo hall / flea market place was or is. That's what they used to shoot. And you can, if you pause the scene, you can see like when he gets into his car and like screeches off, and it shows a little bit of like the storefronts and stuff. You see the J Train, you see Alfie's Pizzeria, which I've eaten at a bunch of times. I used to work around there. It's just like really cool to see. Now, let me pause for a minute and shout out the acting in this series. Across the board, phenomenal. The mom, Frances Cobb, is so believable in being a tortured soul that has this kid that she knows to be evil, losing her other two sons, having to shoulder the burden of raising him anyway, depicting these bouts of like dementia and slipping in and out of lucidity. Victor Aguilar's character that he plays with a lisp and just does a phenomenal job, knocks it out the park in being the mentee of Oz that steps up to the plate, is willing to do anything, but is hesitant to do so at the same time and wants to prove himself. Sophia Falcone, who plays this cool, creepy, calculated yet unhinged, mysterious kind of character. And by the way, her flashback scenes of her like getting committed into Arkham Asylum, when you start meeting all the other inmates within the asylum, the crazy ladies, fucking wow. They are like such disturbed, tortured, fucking crazy characters. And then we have the cherry on top of the entire series, Oz Cobb, played by Colin Farrell. Colin Farrell is so good in this. The prosthetics are so good in this that I knew after watching the Batman, or found out rather after watching the Batman, the film, that Colin Farrell was the one that played Penguin in the smaller role that he had in that film. And I was blown away. Then I forgot again that Colin Farrell played that role, remembered again when watching the series, and was equally blown away. That's how good he fucking is in this series. And the prosthetics, by the way, were created by Mike Marino, who, there's montages of this online that you guys can check out, but they have Colin Farrell in makeup for 3 hours each and every time they have to add the makeup. And that's, now they have it down to a science of the 3 hours, but before it was like many hours more. And in time, they get better at doing it and more used to it, and whittle it down to 3 hours. But that's how long it takes to transform Colin Farrell into the Penguin, into Oz. And Colin Farrell himself says that the show definitely would not exist if it weren't for Mike Marino and the mastery of what he did with these physical manifestations of this character. And just his accent and his mannerisms, he has to win whatever the top tier award, which I guess it would be like an Emmy for a show. is, he has to win that. That's how Illy is. There's a funny episode of JBP, shout out to the Joe Budden podcast, where they're speaking about the show like when it first came out, and I think it was like Ish and Ice or Parks, or a few of them, they were all talking about it because they all watched it, and a few of them were like, you know, Colin Farrell was like really dope in it, so on and so forth. And Joe Budden is a little lost. He's like, I haven't seen that episode though, you know, don't spoil it or whatever. And they're like, what episode? What are you talking about? With Colin Farrell? I haven't seen him. And they were like, Colin Farrell is Penguin. And he just, and Joe's just fucking mind blown. That's how ill Colin Farrell is in this, and how he disappears into this character. Now, at the end of the series, before I wrap up, huge spoiler coming, there's a shocker scene that happens, which ties to Oz's characterization that we spoke about earlier, and how he's becoming, you know, the worst parts of himself. He's delving deeper into that. After seemingly getting away with everything, getting his way, dividing and conquering, and landing at the top of the game, he finds himself at a hospital where his mom, he finds out, is going to be in a vegetative state, but she's still alive after the stroke. He's going to survive from the stab wounds. Victor's there, finds him, you know, his right-hand man. They're going to be on top of the world. Their plan to take over shit is bearing fruit, finally. And then while sitting in a park by the water, Oz puts his arm around Vic, tells him that they're family, and that family is strength, but that it's also a weakness, and that he can't take him where he's about to go. And he strangles and kills Vic. That scene in and of itself, it like underscores his moral descent into just pure evil. And it also highlights a common writing trope and narrative convention that we often see in the stories of villains, which is them severing all the personal ties that they have, severing those ties, and it becoming a turning point for them to become the absolute worst versions of themselves. And by the end of the series, our main character, Oz, you know, gained that external want of becoming the Kingpin, but he absolutely lost the internal want of his mom's validation, because she's like stuck in a vegetative state. He buys the penthouse and has her in a hospital bed, you know, completely immobile, just like with her eyes open, being fed by a home attendant, looking out of a window, and you see a tear drop from her eye. So he got the external want, lost the internal want. And he got himself a Rolls Royce. He has the penthouse. And from a symbolism and metaphor perspective, the penthouse represents Oz's like climb to power, but it loses that meaning of what it was supposed to mean because he lost that validation from his mom, because she's in a vegetative state. And it's interesting from a writing perspective how we can use settings like that to symbolize either successes or failures or some sort of personal transformation. And last but certainly not least, just a touch of speculation, what I think they're setting up for season 2, which I hope they do. In the historical character of the Penguin, you know, he was this villain, then he became this like person of the people, then he ran for political office, a la Pablo Escobar. And they kind of set the stage for his political ambitions because they said things that I remember as a slogan, I believe, from Batman Returns, which is Oz Cobb, a man of the people. Somebody said that. He also had, you know, he walked through City Hall and he was looking at the mayor like in awe, or the mayor-elect. And he was also wheeling and dealing with the city councilman. So I feel like they're kind of setting the stage for that to be like a major through line in season 2. Then something super interesting that just came out of left field for me. Sophia winds up back in Arkham. Oz gets her locked up and framed again. And so she's essentially out of the way from his perspective. She gets a letter while in Arkham from her quote-unquote half-sister, whose name is Selina Kyle. Selina Kyle, historically in the Batman series, is Catwoman. So I think she's going to factor into the next season as well. And that, folks, was my little recap and review of the HBO original series, The Penguin. I highly recommend it, and it's streaming now on HBO Max.